Amazon announced on Thursday that its $8.5 billion deal to buy the iconic MGM movie and television studio was now complete, making more than 4,000 film titles, including the Oscar-nominated Licorice Pizza and James Bond franchise, part of the e-commerce giant's streaming video service. Amazon's decision to close the deal comes after a deadline passed for the U.S. Federal Trade Commission to challenge the acquisition, which was announced in May of last year. That drew antitrust scrutiny from the FTC, but Amazon said it had, quote, substantially complied with requests for information about the deal. Now, nearly a year later, Amazon is clear of regulatory hurdles. The FTC declined to comment. The European Commission approved the deal Tuesday with no conditions. In a statement, Amazon said it would welcome all MGM employees to the company and work with the studio's leadership, indicating there would not be layoffs. MGM's thousands of movie titles, including Rocky and Silence of the Lambs, and its even longer list of TV shows will bolster Amazon's Prime Video, which costs $14.99 a month in the U.S., and will help Amazon compete with streaming rivals Netflix and Disney+.
South Korea hit a record daily COVID-19 high with more than 600,000 new cases and 429 deaths, authorities said on Thursday. But the country that once held an aggressive stance against COVID-19 is set to end restrictions. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency said the highly infectious Omicron variant was driving the wave of infections. Despite the numbers, the government shows no sign of rethinking plans to remove almost all social distancing restrictions in coming days and weeks, and public opinion appears to support those moves. Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency spokesman Lee Sang-won.
오미크론의 높은 전염력은
There is a limit to curbing the Omicron's high transmission rate with the social distancing rules that we have imposed until now. And the tough distancing rules cause a lot of social burden.
The country has pushed back a curfew on eateries to 11 p.m., stopped enforcing vaccine passes, and plans to drop a quarantine for vaccinated travelers arriving from overseas. A decision on whether to ease further measures, such as a current 6-person limit on private gatherings, is expected as early as Friday. South Korea also mandates masks in all public indoor and outdoor spaces. Though it never adopted a zero-COVID policy and never imposed wide lockdowns, South Korea once used aggressive tracking, tracing, and quarantines to control new cases. Nearly 63% of the country's 52 million residents had received booster shots, officials said, with 86% of the population fully vaccinated.
Protests like this reflect growing tension and frustration in Cuba as a flood of people trying to leave the country face new travel blocks.
Every time I come to my village, 10 people have left. Relatives, friends, neighbors. It's hard to get up in the morning and find that you're not going to see them anymore.
It all started when Nicaragua lifted visa requirements for Cuba in November. Many dropped everything, sold their homes, and raced to Havana's airport, all in hopes of joining the so-called migrant highway through Central America to the United States. But that in turn led to soaring airfares along with fresh visa requirements in travel hubs like Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica. Jorge Duani is a migration expert with Florida International University.
We see a very precarious situation for most of the Cuban population. Thousands of these people surely have no other way out of this economic crisis than to leave the country. So they seek different ways, for example, by traveling to Russia to eventually cross the border into Europe.
Cuba has blamed the United States for the uptick in illegal immigration, saying the country's policies, including the Cold War-era embargo, encourages Cubans to risk their lives to leave the island. Darnell Perez is among those who made the journey.
There were only Cubans in the buses coming from Nicaragua, Honduras, and Guatemala. There are many, thousands of migrants who are leaving. At present, the greatest dream of the Cuban youth is to leave Cuba.
More than 16,000 Cubans were apprehended at the border in February, a monthly record, according to U.S. figures.
All three major indexes finished higher on Thursday, building on a post-Fed rally after the U.S. Central Bank's plan for more rate hikes lifted some uncertainty for investors. The Dow and S&P closed up 1.25%, while the Nasdaq finished up 1 1/3. But ICAP's chief investment officer, Jay Hatfield, said investors might want to curb their enthusiasm.
That it is a big positive for the market, but we are in a seasonally bad time because we're not in earnings season. So we think, and also, of course, can't ignore the Ukraine war and some negative developments there, although there could be a peace agreement as well. So we think the market is still somewhat range bound, probably created support at 4150 on the S&P, with resistance starting kind of where we are now to 4500 on the S&P.
Investors were also reassured that Russia may, at least for now, have averted what would have been its first default in a century after creditors received payments in dollars, according to two market sources. The energy sector was the biggest percentage gainer among the S&P's major industry sectors, as oil prices climbed on supply concerns after several days of losses. And U.S.-listed shares of Chinese tech giants Alibaba, Baidu, and JD.com pulled back a day after a huge rally on Beijing's move to support markets.
A warm and emotional welcome in Madrid greeted Ukrainian refugees driven from Poland overnight on Thursday in a fleet of Spanish volunteer taxis. They arrived to a banner saying "Welcome" in Ukrainian, and people lining the streets. Some of the 133 refugees burst into tears. The drivers themselves organised their 40-hour round trip. They said the cost of around $55,000 was funded by themselves and donations. Jose Maria Perez drove his taxi for more than 3,100 miles to pick up the refugees.
We spent the night in Warsaw, and the following night we began the most beautiful and hardest part. It was the hardest part because we heard very tough stories. I just had a sneak peek of the place in which they were staying. I didn't want to see it because I was shocked. It was really moving to see so many people trying to help, and so many people in need of help. When we parked and we got the families assigned with their documents, just picture it, we were happy.
Their initiative is just one of many springing up across Spain and Europe to help refugees from Ukraine. When they got to Nadarzyn, near the Polish capital Warsaw, the drivers delivered donations they'd collected and prepared space to take refugees back to Madrid. The taxis pulled into San Anton Church in central Madrid shortly after 1 a.m. and were greeted by Father Angel, who heads an NGO, Messengers for Peace. Some 4,500 Ukrainian refugees have been registered in Spain since Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. But Spain's migration minister says the real number is much higher.